4K project is how we, the Kinnan Park Complex, multi-use community centre and community anchor organisation in Glasgow, responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was an initial response knowing that, you know, we couldn't sit idly by as the communities that we serve were going to be facing ever increasing needs. And so we realised that we were in an extremely privileged position to be able to use our networks and our resources and our assets to be able to do something. And that really started by thinking about how could we start to deliver our existing services in a different way. And, you know, as you'll find out from Dylan and Lindsay, that led to some quite interesting developments as well. You know, it was aimed at supporting our members. We're a membership organisation, and we're open to folks primarily from the G41 and G51 postcodes. So that's in and around Greater Govan and Kinnan Park, and into this, you know, sort of south side of Glasgow as well. And initially what we wanted to do was to support our members and the communities that they're part of. Whilst we seek to build one community as Kinnan Park, we really recognise that the folks that are part of that community are also part of a whole other range of communities, and what we wanted to do was to support them and all the communities that they're part of. And we really tried to approach it from a neighbourhood solidarity perspective. So what that meant is that we realised that the people best placed to help each other were the people in these communities themselves, and those that lived closest to them as well. I think, you know, given all the restrictions on movement and all the uncertainty that we had back in April about, you know, what can you do? Can you put a flyer through the door? How can you get in touch with people? There was a lot of unknowns at that time, and we really recognised that it was best to try and do this in a kind of street by street, block by block approach, realising that the best people to support each other were those that were kind of geographically closest to each other. The aims of the project itself, which were kind of set up after discussions with the initial volunteers. The first thing that we did was we just stuck flyers through about 10,000 doors to find out, you know, who was interested in helping in some way, and who felt that they needed help. And through those kind of initial discussions, we came up with these three project aims: that we wanted our communities to be empowered to look after themselves and each other first and foremost, and that really meant that they would have access to all the goods and the services and the support that we needed. You know, back at the start with the panic buying and the toilet roll holding and all this, I think primarily in our minds was the need for people to have access to food. But we also recognised earlier on that we were going to need a whole load of different services, not least those which were related to trying to reduce the impact of social isolation. And so that's where the third aim of making sure that our communities were connected came from. We structured this in three main teams. We kind of dissolved temporarily our own organisational structure and structured the organisation around three sort of crisis response teams. One was the empowerment team, which was led by Lindsay, and she'll be talking in a moment, and then the support team that Dylan was part of, and their presentation will be next, and also the communications team. So, I mean, what were the empowerment team set up to do? They were really set up to try and make sure that people were in contact with their neighbours and looking out for each other. That was something that, you know, that was in the forefront of our minds relatively early on, but also really primarily to make sure that people had access to healthy and nutritious food, and also that we were able to start to work with people to bring them together to do whatever it was that was needed. As we went through this project, there was more and more different needs that were sort of arising, and things that we'd never thought about before. And we realised that the only way that you could do that was working with people to help them meet those needs. And so that was primarily structured around grocery packs that were delivered, and around cooked meals, and around volunteering and squads, and Lindsay will tell you a little bit more about that. The support team, which was essentially set up so that we could check in on everybody and make sure that they were okay and let them know that they weren't alone, that we could make sure that they were receiving the different kinds of support, and listening to them to find out what that support was, you know, primarily being done through phones and WhatsApps and all sorts of different things, but also recognising that you know, navigating the service scape is not something that necessarily comes easy to everybody. So we also wanted to make sure that we were referring others on, because we knew as an organisation we can't meet all the needs of our communities, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to refer folks on to others, and that we could take referrals from other organisations as well. And so they primarily they were getting in touch with folks and making sure that was happening. The communications team were really, as well as making really beautiful graphics and presentation templates that you'll see today, they were doing things like supporting people to be connected to each other, providing access to education and cultural activities to keep people stimulated, and really importantly for us, sharing hope and solidarity widely and freely. I think one of the most disempowering things about major crises is that you don't know what you can do and everything just seems so terrible. And we wanted to get a message out there that actually there was a lot going on and that people were being really active, and that, you know, just because there was this huge problem that had appeared, that, you know, we wanted to make sure that hope and solidarity were shared widely and freely. So, I mean, that's a kind of overview from the project itself. And now what I'd like to do is just to invite Dylan to come on and tell you a little bit more about the support team. Thanks very much, Dylan.
Hi everyone, sorry, trying to make sure that you can both hear me and see the presentation and not just one of the things. So thanks Martin for the introduction. And as Martin was saying, I'm just going to be talking a bit about the support team, the role and the purpose of what we did, the challenges that we had, the strengths of our response, and kind of the lessons that we learned moving forward. I've been working at the KPC for quite a while, but obviously the response that we had was kind of very much all hands on deck and trying to figure out where we begin. So let's begin with that. And this is our team for anyone who hasn't met any of us before. And as Martin has introduced, the focus of our team was very much on health and well-being as a response to the inevitable isolation of lockdown and other problems that came up. And we were the first point of contact for people looking for support from the project, whether this was support with food that Lindsay will be talking about later on, or whether that was regular check-ins and catch-ups with folk on the phone. And the reason I'm kind of separating this into check-ins and catch-ups is because really the kind of support that we offered on the phone was very different depending on what people actually wanted. With some people, it was just a quick phone call to be, hey, how are you doing? Is everything still okay? Are you in touch with your family? You know, have you got the food that you need to eat? And are you finding things to keep you busy? With some people, it was very regular phone calls that could last for, you know, up to an hour because they wanted to have that connection, have those conversations, depending on how many other people they were also speaking to. And for some people, it may have been that we were the only people that they were speaking to. So kind of what they needed from those conversations could be quite different. And we also had our online meetup running every Tuesday, kind of to replace the cafe that we normally have on Tuesday lunchtime, with some craft sessions and just conversations between everyone. And if we identified that people were particularly struggling with isolation, with not being able to have face-to-face contact, or they were maybe, you know, not quite sure how to access support through technology and all of that kind of stuff. Once that was feasible as well, we had one of the members of our team doing physically distanced walks with people to have a chat in person, and to kind of have some semblance of normality. But yeah, at the heart of what we really did was establishing what support people needed and responding to that as it came up. And each month we made hundreds of phone calls. I was trying to look at the statistics and that's just, yeah, hundreds. Because we tried to reach out to people and try to see how we could help. And that also meant that we didn't have, you know, a plan from the very start of what that was going to look like, because nobody planned for a pandemic. You know, our governments were unprepared, leave alone small organizations like ours. So it was very much seeing how we can respond to what comes up. And because of that, we had a bunch of kind of offshoot projects that came up as we were speaking to people and seeing what problems they were having. So for example, we partnered up with Major and Grow to include craft packs and for children and young people with our food packs, and also asked for donations from the community to include toys, and enlisted volunteer help to help people make their gardens into a usable outdoor space at a point when that was kind of the only outdoor space that people could access. We also worked on making sure that people had connection to the internet, so phone top-ups and digital inclusion in terms of long-term loans of tablets and laptops, because the internet became such a massive lifeline for people and the only way really to connect with the rest of the world. We had a bunch of ESOL volunteers so that people who were learning English could stay on top of that, and also introduced our pet care project, which meant that people were getting pet food and also, for example, their dog walked if that was not something that they were able to do at that point in time. One of the things that was important for us to recognize as well was that we wouldn't be able to support with everything that came up, and to recognize where our limits were. And in those cases, to refer to other sources of support, whether that was other organizations, or whether that was emailing someone's housing association, or giving a call to their community mental health team, and similar, to kind of creating those connections and referring to Money Matters, for example, if people were experiencing financial problems, or Government Law Center, places like that as well. Sorry, that's kind of going, okay, here we go. One of the important things for us in terms of how we operated was that our support was value-led, and that we didn't want to create barriers for people when they were accessing our support. We didn't want eligibility criteria or anything like that. We're very much there at the point of contact, listening to what was needed and responding to that. Because we wanted to recognize that it's really difficult for people to ask for help to begin with. And we didn't want to create additional barriers when somebody was admitting that they needed some extra support. And one of the things we also noticed, which I think is really important to recognize, is that while COVID was difficult for everyone, and it was difficult for ourselves as well, because we were responding to this while also adapting to completely new ways of working from our kitchens, from our bedrooms, connecting online and all those things. A lot of the problems that we saw arise weren't problems that were created by COVID. They were problems that were exacerbated by it. People were already isolated, people were already facing food poverty, and having all kinds of different issues. So COVID kind of just made all of that a lot more apparent to us, and a lot of the time more difficult for people. But it also meant that that was our focus, to respond to those things, and we had additional resources to do that, which was kind of not so much a silver lining, but I think one of the things that I really liked was what Martin shared at one point about how even though we're all weathering the same storm, we're all in different boats. And that was very important for us to recognize that the difficulties we were having were not the same difficulties that other people were having. And sometimes when phone conversations came up, there were things that we couldn't really help with. And that's not to say that, we weren't there to listen. And I think sometimes listening was the thing that was needed the most. So for example, if somebody was waiting to hear whether or not they would be granted leave to remain, or if somebody was just feeling lonely because they hadn't seen their friends and family, sometimes that phone conversation was all that we could offer, but it was actually a lot more than, not having that. And a lot of people, when they were giving feedback to us, they said that it made a massive difference because they got to know us as well. It wasn't the case that we're a faceless organization. They got to know our names, our voices, and we built relationships over time with people. So they trusted us with what was happening in their lives. And as Martin was saying at the start, our main focus was kind of in the areas closest to KPC as we started the project, so in and around Paisley Road West, Kinning Park, Ibrox and Cessnock. But KPC was always a lot more than just about the local community. It's always been a space for different groups and communities to come together. And this meant that as the project was picking up, it expanded definitely beyond what we probably imagined at the start. So for example, one of the communities that uses the Kinning Park complex a lot is the asylum seeker and migrant community. And a lot of the time, people that are new to the city are housed near where Kinning Park is located. And the Unity Centre is quite nearby as well. But as people move on, or for a myriad of different reasons, they end up all across the city. So we soon found that we're delivering food parcels and speaking to people living everywhere. Which overall, that wasn't definitely in any way a bad thing. And we're very happy to be that point of contact and to be that community that spanned way beyond the neighborhood. But it did also present a difficulty for us when we're trying to refer people on in terms of local organizations, because what we realized was that while we have that knowledge about community, about organizations in the South Side and the support available, say in Govan area, we didn't necessarily have that wealth of knowledge in other areas of the city. So that was a steep learning curve for us as well, kind of trying to connect with other organizations and trying to make sure that we have we can offer the support to everyone that we want to be able to offer. Another strength that we had in our response, I believe, was that we had people on our team speaking a number of different languages, and for someone whose first language isn't English, being able to message us or call us and speak in Spanish, Amharic, or any other languages, it was really, really helpful because it just removes that barrier that exists otherwise. And when those barriers did exist, we tried our best to enlist volunteers to help us with translations to Farsi, Kurdish Sorani, Arabic, and a number of community languages. But of course, that barrier didn't disappear, and there's more community languages out there than we have members of staff. So sometimes that barrier was still present. And it was good to be able to refer people to other organizations where there may be someone who does speak their language and who will be able to have a conversation that we wouldn't be able to have with them. I think as well, in terms of the difficulties that we had, was the realization that a lot of people, because they were really isolated, we became a lifeline for them. And they weren't always having conversations with anyone else. And it was also about learning to accept our limits of what we can do in our responses and what we are able to achieve, and not feeling like we're taking on personal responsibility for someone else, which I think is a big lesson in terms of moving forward as well, in what we can and can't do. And yeah, as I already mentioned, in terms of the fact that we were citywide, even if that wasn't the initial plan. And in regards to moving forward, I think we're talking now about, this project is over, those months are over, but the reality is that most informal networks that people were using for support are still unable to operate. People still aren't able to gather in places that they normally would. And life is very, very far from back to normal. So that support is still very much needed for people, and people are still experiencing the effects of crisis, whether that's financially, whether that's isolation, or whatever else, and also uncertainty about upcoming restrictions. So in terms of moving forward, it's kind of figuring out what it looks like now that we have the cafe back up and running, but we're also trying to still speak to people on the phone and kind of find that golden middle that offers support to people in different forms. But I think we've also come out on, not on the other side, but come to this point with a much stronger team and improved structures and processes in place to respond to whatever comes up in the future. Because when initially, as we came into this, it was very much trying to catch our tail and figuring out what we're doing, whereas now we have a much better idea of how to respond to things like this as they come up.
Thanks very much, Dylan. I think, Dylan hit on some really important points there. which was the scope and the structure and the size of this just continued to grow. I think we started off with around 40 or 45 folks that we initially identified from regular attendees to our café, which is aimed at social isolation, that we thought we would be providing some regular support to, and that grew to about 200 by the end of it. And another service that we provided that continually kept growing and represented some challenges in that respect is what Lindsay's going to tell you about now with the empowerment team. So I'm just going to pass over to Lindsay just now.
Great, thanks Martin. It's nice to see so many people have joined us today and some nice familiar faces. And yeah, thank you so much, Dylan. So yeah, the story about the empowerment team is what we did to support what the support workers sourced and what they found as needs and wants that community members needed. Yeah, so the empowerment team, what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes is about how we were able to deliver on allowing the community members and Glasgow-wide to access healthy, nutritious food. Talk a little bit about how we actually made that food delivery and cooking programme, how we managed to actually get that out to people. And a big focus talking about volunteering and squads, being that a lot of what we did was achieved from the volunteers and they were put into squads, so food squad or pet care squad, and were then able to respond to what we needed to achieve. But I thought first it'd be nice to quickly talk about the food system in Scotland anyway. So a lot of you might already know the food system was already vulnerable before COVID-19. And the Trussell Trust had recorded 1.33 million emergency packs given out per year, and that's from 2018 figures. And during COVID-19, many of the food banks had to close. They didn't have the funding, the food donations, the space, or the volunteers. With that in mind, Trussell Trust managed to record that there was an 89% increase in the needs for emergency food parcels during April 2020 compared to April 2019. It's a massive jump, and 107% rise in the parcels given to children through the Trussell Trust. That's something I always struggle with, that word. Yeah, so there was a bit of a need there. You'll see there's a couple of links on that presentation to where that information's from. Presentation will be available afterwards, so if you want access to those reports, then you can have a little look at them. One of the main things, like Martin said to begin with, that we focus a lot of our time on producing grocery packs and getting them to people that were struggling with food poverty at the time of the crisis. And it's kind of broken into kind of three areas and how we achieved that. So we sourced a lot of the food, and that was more of the staff doing that. The staff spent a lot of time sourcing the food. We would create and pack the grocery boxes or grocery packs, and we'd distribute them, and that's where the volunteers really came into their own. If it wasn't for the volunteers, we wouldn't have achieved what we did, and you'll see later on how much we actually sent out. So a big focus was on nutrition, and we thought about what can we give that's high in protein and will keep them feeling fuller for longer. And we tried to work with as many local organisations as possible. So we'd order from Green City a lot of our grains and a lot of our tins. We used Locavore to do deliveries for a lot of tin goods. We used locally the Cessnock Food Store in Paisley Road West for our fresh vegetables. So that was something we were really keen to supply, was fresh veg, because we knew that wasn't always something that came in grocery packs. We also we got a lot of donations from the community members, other organisations like Maslow's, which is an organisation in Govan. And then we were able to get a free membership with FareShare. For those that don't know who FareShare are, they work with supermarkets, they intercept their surplus and then they give it out to community organisations like ours. And we also did rely on local supermarkets. Sometimes what was requested, the quickest way to get everything together was just to pop round to the local supermarket and pick up the items. So as I said, mostly it was the staff that would deal with all that, ordering and receiving that. And we worked out of Clyde Community Hall in Ibrox. As you might not be aware, but our actual Kinnan Park building is under refurb at the moment. And how do we then create these packs? Well, the support workers, and Dylan spoke about the support team, we filled out a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet it would tell us the household size, it would tell us their wants and needs, any allergies. We would then put this out onto our table layout, and then we'd start to try and divvy up all the food depending on the size of the household, and trying to provide 14 days worth of food for that household. So we'd put out the basic items, we would put out any request. That could be coffee, that could be tea bags, it could be a cultural sort of request. We would have hygiene requests, we would have baby requests, being food, nappies, milk, hygiene products for the babies. We had toys, and then this would all go out and be packed by volunteers in a socially distanced way in Clyde Community Hall. And we'd labelled the bags to make sure that the bags were delivered to the right person. So we'd have lots of Sharpies, and we'd write the names on the bags so that they were packed into the volunteers' cars. Made it really easy for the volunteers to see who was to get what from their car. And we distributed twice a week, Wednesday and Friday afternoons. So a lot of the crating and packing was done on a Tuesday, Thursday, with the final fresh veg put in a Wednesday, Friday morning. And our volunteers would arrive at 15-minute intervals to the centre, so to limit the amount of people that came in. Each driver would have about 3 or 5 stops. At most it would be 2 hours per driver, but sometimes it would take a little bit longer depending on their route. But in order to make that as easy as possible for them, our food coordinator at the time, Johnny, would take some time to logistically plan through the AA route planner and Google Maps what route would be good for the driver and what would take them on the same road back home if possible. And then we would print this out per driver, and as the driver arrived, we would hand them the printout which told them how many bags per person, any instructions about drop-off, and then we'd help them load it into their car, wearing masks all the time and trying to limit the amount of people going in and out the door. And so that's how our grocery packs ran. It seems like such a small thing when you look at it one screen. It was a massive effort, but I think that the volunteers did a great job. And I think it's really important that we recognise that. It was the volunteers, they really did. They were the heroes of the story. Without them, we wouldn't have achieved what we did. From grocery packs to putting on their chef hats and cooking food at home, making sure that was delivered Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays every week, and making sure that there was enough so that each person in that household could have a really nutritious meal each day of the week. Also, we were able to distribute toys, so our volunteers collected toys. They would help sanitise them. We would maybe put them into quarantine for 72 hours, depending on the item. We'd then distribute that out based on what the support workers had found out about the families, and then the volunteers would drop that off. We also had a quick response WhatsApp group, and that let us respond really quickly to needs like prescription pickups, or somebody needed some cat litter, or we were short a driver for that day and we needed somebody to help us out. And so our quick response team on WhatsApp was very vital to what we did. And those not on WhatsApp, we used emails, we called, we text, we did lots of things to reach out to people. And also pet care, Dylan mentioned about pet care. It's surprising to understand that a lot of people will feed their animals before they feed themselves. And we thought it was great to be able to get this access to pet care, cat litter, dog grooming items and whatever they needed so that they could look after themselves as well as their pets. And not on this screen, but what the volunteers also dropped off were laptops and mobiles. They went to garden for people, and they delivered English as a second language course sessions over Zoom to people that needed them. And yet, if it wasn't for these guys putting in 1,583 volunteer hours, and that's the hours that we recorded, I'm sure there was some missed, then we wouldn't have managed to deliver what we did. And what did we deliver? Well, the empowerment team likes to celebrate. It was 17,458 kilos of food that went out, over 17 metric tonne. And that translated, well, 1,532 were the cooked meals delivered straight to their door, with a very good nutritious value in that. And we recorded 929 grocery boxes that went out between April and August to multiple people across the city. And when we take that weight and we look at what we sent out for 14 days per household per person, we estimate it's 32,412 meals that were delivered through the project, which is a fantastic amount of help to give people. And yeah, I really hope it made a massive difference to people during the crisis. And just some challenges to chat about. Working within the COVID-19 hygiene guidelines was a challenge. Limiting the number of people that were in Clyde Hall, socially distancing when we were working. And that we overcame that challenge. We worked harder, we worked different. We were able to deliver it. We did have initially unreliable food stocks from suppliers, so even if we ordered it, we didn't get it. And toilet roll was one of them, because we always sent toilet roll when we could. Food storage and rotation were a very limited space, limited refrigeration, just limited space because of social distancing. But we just had to bring in a lot of food and get it all back out every week. We did have a challenge accessing and providing for culturally appropriate food. So if we had African food requests, we were able to get some of it, but we felt like we could have had more options, but what we had to get access to, it just wasn't necessarily everything that we wanted to give. Planning logistics was a big challenge, multiple stops across the city. And then regular scheduling and changes to the delivery schedule. Volunteers have lives, they have their own challenges, so we found that we were doing a lot of rescheduling, but we always achieved it, and that was always because other volunteers stepped in. And of course, sometimes the staff would get in their car and they would drop off as well. And a couple of things of what we learned then. Well, we learned that bulk buying items allows for nutritious packs at a low cost, something that we hope to kind of try and use in the future. Food inequality is across Glasgow. It doesn't matter which postcode you live in, it's there. Food wasn't the only essential item people were unable to access. It might have been sanitary protection, it might have been nappies, it could have just been toothpaste. We saw a need for support with cooking skills, so we've actually got an online recipe section and videos that we produced based on what we sent out in the packs. We learned there's a strong sense of community solidarity throughout Glasgow. And I guess the final thing, the power of people can achieve amazing, amazing things. Thanks very much, everyone. I hope that was interesting. I'll just pass you back to Martin.
That was great, Lindsay. I've seen this film before, right? You know, I knew about all this, but even I found it super interesting to see it back. I think, you know, one of the things that we probably want to highlight there was the idea of food dignity is something that we tried to use to guide us. We tried to use documents like the independent working groups research around food dignity, and first and foremost it's about giving people choice. You know, quite often that means about giving people direct cash transfers. We were lucky enough to be able to secure around £80,000 in funding for other organisations, including some volunteer-led organisations as well. And in a lot of cases, they decided just to do direct cash transfers. That's something which was kind of not allowed under the lottery's previous guidelines, but given the needs within the situation and given the fact that we were able to evidence that, we then sort of successfully challenged that, and that meant that there was, you know, tens of thousands of pounds worth of direct cash transfers that were going to folks as well, because giving people the choice. We didn't go down that route ourselves. We made calculations, and we calculated through accessing fair share, which, you know, usually in the before times was around intercepted surplus supermarket stock, but they were buying centrally using Scottish Government funds. We were able to kind of double or treble the amount of food that we calculated that somebody could buy if they just went to their local supermarket with the same amount of money. And that was because we were able to supplement it through donated food, through central purchase food like like fair share, and we were able to bulk buy as well directly from wholesalers. But what we definitely we did was we still introduced aspects of choice. And I think one of the things which is important to say is that actually those small items that people were able to request probably proportionally took up much more time than anything else in the kind of food packaging procedure. But at the same time, you know, we felt that that was important, that we wanted to be able to stand by that. And although, you know, a small thing at other times might not seem so important, when you've had so many choices taken away from you, the ability to choose what it is that you're eating is kind of fundamental as well. And so actually, as well as making sure that people were fed in general, making sure that somebody just had that tangerine that they were really looking forward to was something that was really important to us. And I think one of the things that I feel most proud of, because I have went to other kind of, you know, evaluation meetings where people have kind of questioned whether they would have eaten the things that went out in their own food packets, and that was around choices that we made. We're not criticising, but for us, we wanted to make that choice. It did make things more difficult, but at the end of the day, it's something then, you know, that we'll always be able to be proud of. So I know that being the biggest culprit myself, we're running a little bit short of time. We're supposed to be finishing up for about 3 o'clock. So unless everybody has got anything burning that they want to ask you, I maybe just ask Claire to stick us down into some smaller groups to have a kind of quick discussion for 10 minutes. And I'm not sure if we're going to go. We don't have a great deal of time to feedback, folks. But, you know, I maybe just ask the facilitators just, and I apologise if anybody does have to leave bang on 3 o'clock. If anybody does want to hang around, I can certainly hang around for a little bit later if you've got any specific questions or anything else that you'd like to know. But very quickly, just ask each of the facilitators to share maybe one thing from their group, and if there's anybody else in that group that wants to share one thing. So I'll just go with the person at the top of my screen. So that'd be you, Sarah. Anything that you want to really share in your group?
Yeah, thank you. We talked about the value of partnership working and new partnerships, and the idea of structural overhaul and radically changing systems in this time of pandemic and change.
Well done. You've done well in 10 minutes there. So we'll expect that manifesto and route map for change to be published by Tuesday. Thank you very much. And if you could radically overhaul the system by next Thursday, then happy days. Anybody else in Sarah's group want to highlight anything which was particularly important for them? Okie dokie. Rachel, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So yeah, we commented on how organizations adapted very quickly. So there was like specifically how KPC just kind of created something and adapted very quick to a crisis, and the acknowledgement of like how mostly third sector across the board and lots of different organizations and charities and groups really responded and acted, and that there was a lot of outreach to make sure that people were getting the help that they needed.
Fantastic. Anybody else from Rachel's group want to add anything there? Dylan, what about your good self?
We didn't get a chance to go into it in as much depth as we probably would have wanted, but we talked about well, Joe shared about the Edinburgh community food response, and Hannah was talking about Ubuntu and kind of the differences and similarities between the responses and how we all got on.
Yeah, and what was the biggest similarity and what was the biggest difference?
Well, Joe was saying in terms of Edinburgh Community Food was that they were very much delivering this just through their existing staff, and obviously we had a bunch of volunteers that were able to help us, which I would imagine Lindsay would agree that made a massive difference. But in terms of similarities, it was very much about delivering healthy and nutritious food and aiming to make sure that people had good food to eat, and also that they were also getting fair share top-ups, and that was quite heavily relied on.
Brilliant. Rachel, were you facilitating one group? Oh no, we've done you. Sorry, Lindsay.
Hello, yeah. So we had a quick chat about some of the other projects across Scotland, things like community organisations who had access to minibuses, had a bit, were able to take more food per journey. We talked about a dementia-friendly Dunblane and how they facilitated children writing to older people. And we just talked about some of the inspirational things that we saw during the crisis. And I've got to say that there was nothing but praise for Kinnan Park, which I think I'd like to say thank you for that, because I think we did respond very quickly, but we did recognise our limitations. But yeah, every time we asked a question, it kind of led back to how great Kinnan Park was. So I'm just going to leave that there.
Fantastic. Is there anybody else that was hosting, Claire, or is it just me? Was there anybody else from Lindsay's group that wanted to share anything there? Fantastic. No, we you know, it's a shame, and I'm sorry we kind of got wrapped up talking, folks, and we maybe should have left a little bit more time for this discussion. And as I say, if anybody kind of wants to hang on and ask specific questions, I'll do that. But had some great conversation, although brief, in our group as well. And so if it's okay to name check you, Yvonne, I'm going to do that. And so Yvonne made a really good point, and Yvonne was working with one of our partner organisations, and she was really vital in helping us. When I talked about challenging using food dignity report, that was from Yvonne. And so about, you know, when trying to balance it and the needs being different for each organisation, about the main thing when you're providing food is giving that aspect of choice and how important that is. And again, you know, that was a kind of directly lifted quote from Yvonne that I used earlier on, which is when so many people have got so many things taken away from them, giving them choice becomes so important. And so she was saying that really the choice and quality is what's important, and recognising that will be quite different from each organisation depending on what your circumstances are and how much food that is that you're buying. But also making sure that, you know, because what can often happen in crisis response is that the things that are put into place actually limit the possibilities for communities to respond properly in times where there's not so much crisis, or the crisis isn't, you know, so all-encompassing. So Yvonne gave a good example of, you know, trying to work with small local food stores to ensure that those local food stores are still going to be there, you know, whether it's running a credit book or whether it's being able to provide food for folks that are, you know, certain kinds of foods which either meet cultural or religious or dietary requirements. And so really being aware of the fact that actually when this big wave of activity comes in, it can really distort the landscape, you know, and that's something that's maybe known a little bit more in, you know, international aid kind of circles as well, but we have to think about it as well, especially, you know, for an organisation like Kinnan Park. We have to realise in certain ways, although we don't necessarily view ourselves as such, we're an institution, and so we have to be careful that we don't distort, you know, the landscape too much. But I think that was one of the things that I took away from it, that, and also we talked about partnerships and how some amazing partnerships grew out of this as well, and how they were keen to take them forward as well, you know, because actually it's, you know, each of the different organisations, institutions, groups has got a role to play, and if we're able to create partnerships and synergies, you know, across these supposed sectors, when we've all got the same aims, then we'll do quite well in the future. Well, I mean, that's us at kind of 3 o'clock. I don't know if there's anything else that anybody kind of really would like to share or say or feedback about today, before, you know, we let you all head off into the sunset. It's 3 o'clock, so the sunset will be about 20 minutes now. No, you can't got your tongues. All right. Well, I think that nothing else remains but to say thanks very much. Thanks very much first and foremost to yourselves for coming along, and thanks very much to everybody from the Kinnan Park Complex, to Claire and the communications team for facilitating the event today and making the lovely templates, to Lindsay and Dylan for taking the lead and doing some presentations there for us, to Sarah and Rachel for helping facilitate the groups, and really everybody that's been involved, volunteers, community members, partner organisations, funders, supporters. You've all really played a vital role within this story, and it's one that certainly I'm proud to have had a small part within as well. And and I hope it's given you some inspiration going forward, because there's plenty more work to be done. Right, thanks folks.
Thank you.